Sister Jill McDonald is a legend. So if you don't know her, you should know her. And that's why it's important that she's in front of all of you so that you can continue to learn from her and her work. She's been in Catholic education through many transitions. She's been at NCA through many transitions. And we are blessed to have her advice and wisdom. She's going to share a lot about her role with you. But like the rest of us, we're here to serve you. So as you have moments where you need advice, she is your phone call away. I'm grateful that she's also very active on these monthly superintendent calls. If you've noticed twice so far this year, that Q&A is really critical because no one knows what's happening in real time as quickly as Sister Dale. And so it's an honor to introduce her to you. And we're grateful that you're able to be with us in this way. So thanks for being here. And we'll get started. Sister, can you see the room okay? We're going to let you just get started and we'll let you know if we hear questions out here that you can't hear.
Okay, yes, good morning. I hope my volume is okay. I'm happy to be here with you this morning. As Jill said, I've been working on government programs. This is my 27th year at NCEA, so I've seen a lot come and go. And so I'm happy to share with you some information about federal program benefits that are available to teachers, to principals, to, in some cases, superintendents, and even families. And so while I can't go into any great depth on the benefits in their particulars, I would like to do an overview and know that on our public policy site at NCEA, there are details about each of the programs, and my contact information is at the end of this presentation, and I'm available for phone calls, for emails, and sometimes I even do presentations, for diocesan principals and people who deal with the government program. So I'm here to help you get some idea of what's available and how to begin going about getting it for your students and teachers. So let's begin. What I'd like to talk about are these programs, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA. And when that law was passed in 1965, it was called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, and that's its legal title. Every time they reauthorize it, each administration likes to give it its own spin. So we had Improving America Schools Act. Most of you have some recollection of No Child Left Behind, and now it's Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. But the federal government will always talk about it as ESEA. Then we'll talk about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. I'll talk about the COVID relief benefits that are available, the 529 tax savings plans, public service loan forgiveness that's now being revamped, and parental choice programs in Catholic schools. So it's kind of a blitz in an hour, but hopefully give you enough information to whet your appetite to learn more. So since 1965, Catholic schools have been participants in federal education programs. As I like to say to some of the federal people who are particularly, congressional people, like, you don't do a federal program. Yeah, we've done them since 1965, and there's not a program we haven't been able to make work for us effectively. So when the law was passed, the participation in private school personnel and students was allowable under these two principles, the child benefit theory and the public trusteeship. So under the child benefit theory, the services must be provided to students and teachers, and not any financial aid to the school. And that has always been an important part of our participation, because once you take federal money and you become a recipient of federal funds, FFA, federal financial assistance, you then lose the exemptions you have under Title 9, which is dealing with students, Title 7, which is your employment, and ADA Title 504, which is the disabilities. And I'll talk about those three things in a few minutes, but it's really important, and particularly more so in this current period in which we're looking at all kinds of challenges to religious liberty and exemptions to those three bills that three legislative pieces that I talked about are important because it impinges upon our ability to operate as a Catholic school following Catholic faith teachings. So it's really important that you do not take money. And most of the title programs do have specific, well, ESEA has specific language that says receipt of the services does not make you a recipient of federal funds. The other important piece underlying child benefit theory is that services provided must address the needs of the private school students and teachers, so that when you are dealing with the public school authorities on getting these services, you have to make a case for what your students and teachers need to be successful in the schools in which they are located. So that a public school program may in some cases be applicable, but certainly not all the time. And having you just duplicate a public school program is in violation of the law. The other is public trusteeship, that the LEA, the local education agency, it's a synonym for the public school district, remains in control of the funds. And so you request the goods and services from the district and they pay for them basically and deliver it to you. The other is that the services must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological, so that if you're attending a conference, particularly the NCEA convention, your LEA will want to look at the program and decide what's a secular piece, what's a religious piece, and they'll only pay for the secular, neutral, non-ideological portions of it. So these are the principles for all of the programs, and it's important that we keep in mind we're servicing our students and we are taking goods and services, not money. So there are certain provisions of ESSA that do apply to us. The first one is the Title I, Part A, which most of our schools know about, and a good many of them use them. That is the program to provide supplemental services to at-risk students who are failing or in danger of failing to meet the standards that the school expects for them to pass and to succeed. And so it's an opportunity to provide underachieving students additional help to be able to keep up with their peers. Title I, Part C is the education of migratory children. I have never yet met a school that has used this program, but it is available. That's the program designed really primarily for those on the agricultural circuit or other seasonal work where students are constantly traveling, and this provides additional resources so that, each time they get to a new school and they're starting fractions again, and they never learn decimals and whatever. And so this is to provide additional materials so that students can have a more integrated curriculum, even if they are on the road most of the time. Title II, Part A is probably the one our schools are most familiar with. And that's it's called Preparing, Training, and Recruiting Teachers and School Leaders. The recruiting piece does not apply to us. That's money to recruit public school teachers. We're part of the preparing and training. This is all the professional development opportunities that are available for our teachers to improve learning for their students. Part 3, Title III, Part A, the language instruction for English learners and immigrant students. Those are two different populations in this law. The English learners are those students who are most likely citizens, but they come from a home in which English is not the first language. And then immigrant students obviously refers to those who are of immigrant status. And they never in any of the law are we to require proof of legal entry. Immigrant learners are immigrant learners, regardless of their status. And this provides materials, particularly for teachers, to assist in helping students acquire English language. That program is available to our schools if they're located in a district that uses that program. If the district does not apply for Title III funds, then we can't apply because the district doesn't have the funds. Title IV, Part A, Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants. There are three pieces to this. One is the well-rounded education. And that actually, that part of the law contained everything any legislator had a special affinity for. So whether they wanted to study the Constitution, all kinds of things are in there. But what benefits most of our programs would be, AP, IB programs, STEM education, great deal to do with integrating technology into the curriculum, and then using data to improve instructions, money to help schools get better equipped to handle data analysis and actually using, data-driven instruction. The second part is health and safety, safe and healthy students. And that deals with school climate. It deals with things about bullying prevention, drug prevention, social emotional well-being, all of those kinds of programs that used to be under the old Safe and Drug-Free Schools program. Title IV, Part B, they're trying to phase this out. This is the 21st century schools. These were big multi-million-dollar grants that a district or even a private school could apply to the federal government directly for. I created after-school programs, summer enrichment programs. If your school is located in a district that has one of these grants, and they're few and far between, but if your school is located in one of those districts, you can have your students participate in the after-school programs and the summer programs. Title IV, Part F is supporting high ability learners and learning. That's gifted intelligent programs. There's a section in the law in subpart 4 that says when appropriate, private school students and schools may participate. So our assumption is it's always appropriate. So if your district has one of these programs, you should be able to participate. Now, section 1117 in ESSA is called Participation of Students Enrolled in Private Schools. And there's a whole section of the law that gives very specific directions about how we participate. And 1117 is primarily for Title I. Title VIII of the bill, the uniform provisions, that covers the other programs that I just mentioned that we can participate in. Both of those documents are on our NCEA website under ESSA. And that's something that whoever is negotiating for these programs for the schools should be familiar with, should download it, should read it, should have it with them when they go to negotiate for the program, so that when the district says, no, you can't do this, you can point to it and say, yes, we can. The law says so, and the regulations. So before I do anything more, I just think it's important to have you take a look at, what are we actually talking about here? We're looking at some big funding for these programs. Title I is a $16.5 billion program. Title II, a $2.1 billion. English language acquisition, that's a small program. That's only $797 million. The only one that's $1 million in this bucket. Title IV is $1.1 billion and IDEA $14 billion. So there's some serious money, and we're supposed to, in all of these programs, be guaranteed equitable services, so that a portion of all of that should be designated for private school students and teachers. And we should go after it. I mean, that's the important thing. The law provides for it, and it's up to our school leaders to make sure that these benefits that are funded by your students and your own taxpayer funding would be made available for those for whom the law allows. So for the participation process, for Title I, you work with the public school district, the LEA, in which the student resides. It's the only program that you have to go back to the district, so that of residency, so that unfortunately for some of you that have 12 or 14 districts from which you draw students, those who are eligible for the services, you have to go to those districts. Everything else, LEA is in which you're located is the agency with which you deal for all of the programs. The LEA is supposed to send you at the start of the year or at the end of last year a notice that you are eligible to participate in these federal program benefits. Do you want to? If you haven't received one of them by now, you should call the district and say that you want to have a meeting and that you do want to participate in the programs and how we're going to go about it. Because timely and meaningful consultation is supposed to take place between the public and private school officials to determine how the funding will be allocated and spent on your students and teachers. In this recent reauthorization of ESEA, now called ESSA, an ombudsman role was created. And this is a person at the state education department is to be appointed to specifically deal with private school participation in federal programs. So that if you are having any difficulty with the district in getting a meeting or in following consultation requirements, the ombudsman is the first person you should contact. And that should be on who that person is, should be on your state education website. It's also on the website for the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Non-Public Education. This consultation process is the key to whether or not you get effective services and equitable services for your students. I borrowed this from the Office of Non-Public Education at the Department of Ed. So these are the consultation is supposed to take place throughout the implementation of the program. It's not you go to one meeting, they say sign in, and here's what we're going to do for you. That's not consultation. Consultation has to be before the program is set up, while it's in operation. You don't wait till the end of the school year to call the district and say the Title I teacher never showed up 14 times. When the teacher doesn't show up the first time, you contact the district and say, a Title I teacher did not appear today. When will that time be made up? So that you monitor the program. You can't interfere. The person who comes to deliver the program is not your employee. That person is the employee of the district. But you have eyes and ears, and just walking around the building, you can see, is this program being effectively implemented? And so what you are expected to talk about in the consultation are, the size and the delivery of services. How are you going to get these benefits for your students? What is the size and scope of the program? How much is it going to go? 10 months? Is it going to go 8 months? How much funding is there to support what we're looking to do for our students? The big issue that we got involved, got very clearly specified in this law renewal for now ESSA, is that they have to discuss third-party providers, that the district is no longer the only provider. It never was, but there's much more specific language that you can request a third-party provider, and that can be a company that provides these services, or a couple of them there with you this week in Salt Lake City, and others who can provide the different services that you may be looking for to serve your students or teachers. In some cases, your own teachers could be employed by the district to provide the services if they are after school or on a weekend or summertime outside their regular contract. And you have to talk about, how the services will be assessed. If they're performing all of these services, are they effective? Do you need to change strategy? That's why, midway through you have an assessment and you talk with the district about how do we make these programs effective? But the overarching thing for all of this is the green box up at the top, needs of private school students and teachers. I said that earlier, I can't say it enough. What do your students need And your teachers need to be able to provide that to the students to succeed where they are with the standards that are expected in your school. And the district can't tell you, well, he's reading at 45 percentile. That might not be good enough to meet the standard your school is expecting of all of its students. And so this person, he or she may need additional services. So I'll let it go at that. But this is, if the consultation is done right, the program works very effectively. So just a couple of Title I program FAQs. How is the money determined? The money to serve private school students is determined by the number of students from low-income families, basically free and reduced price lunch scale of services, so that the money that can be done through a survey. It can be done through, if you actually have the lunch program, who is, of course, with the COVID and everybody gets lunch, that's thrown the scale off a little bit. That you have to have a low income count. So that can be done in a number of ways. And that's explained, in our directives on the website. So the students who are low income generate the money. The students who are at risk for failure or failing to meet standards are the ones who can have it spent on them, so that poverty does not guarantee you some services. The general perception is low income usually means low success rate, which is not always true, we know. But poverty generates the money. At-risk status generates the students who get the services. So you have to get the services from the district in which the student lives. I mean, the two districts, your district and that district, do transactions. But at-risk students who live in an eligible attendance area, and that's a key piece of this. The eligible attendance area for schools that are not deemed by the federal standards to be Title I schools, where they have more than 45% of poverty. But for regular public schools, an attendance area is what the district decides to make it. So that if the district decides that serving students in K-3 would be their attendance area, then your student who's in that district has to be in a K-3 grade. If they're in a grade 4 or 5, they are not in an eligible attendance area and they can't be served. That's a huge problem, determining that and the equity in that, but that is what the law is. Who may be served? Teachers and parents may also be served. There's money in the Title I program to work with the parents of students who are receiving Title I services. And in some cases, there is professional development funding available for professional development for the teachers who work with Title I students. And then who delivers the services? I mentioned that, well, the LEA, they may send in their own teachers to do the services, or third-party providers, as I mentioned, and those third-party providers could also be your teachers who are outside their contract hours. For Title II-A, how is the money determined? That's by formula and per capita count. So the district gets its money based on the number of students it has and the level of poverty. But every school in the district gets the same amount of money. So if the per capita for a public school is $250 a student, then that's the money available for your students as well. And so your amount is the number of students by the PPA, the per pupil allotment. Who may use the funds? School personnel who deal with students. It's not just teachers, it's principals, it can be guidance counselors, technology, people who have direct service to the students, because the professional development activities are to be designed to meet specific needs of students. The funds, as I say, is used there for focus on student needs, but the funding can only be used for secular and non-ideological activities. Faith-based entities may provide Title II services. That was a clarification under the last administration, Department of Education, in keeping with religious liberty and faith-based directives from the administration. The only caveat is that the diocesan office can't use Title II if it is providing its own services to teachers. But if they're bringing in someone from a Catholic university or from some other Catholic school to do the activity, then it can be paid for with Title II. Okay, I'm switch gears for a minute and look at special education. The applicable laws for Catholic schools are the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That's from whence comes Section 504. In 1990, the Rehabilitation Act was modified. Now it's ADA, and the Title II part deals with an expansion of 504. And then the individuals, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that's an education law. But the Rehabilitation Act and ADA are civil rights laws. IDEA is an education law, and they have different applications. But this is an important piece, and important. I mean, I was just dealing the other day, I spoke with a superintendent who's looking at some lawsuit and dealing with disabilities. So this is something that you really need to get very clear with your principals, with the teachers. We don't have a choice in this matter. It's a civil rights law, and certain parts of it are applicable to our schools. So under the Rehabilitation Act 504, prohibited discrimination in employment and access to federally funded programs and services. Okay, so we don't get federal funds, so we're not subject to that, we think. But that was modified in 1990 by Title II of ADA, which expanded the 504 applications to entities operating as public accommodations, regardless of funding. So churches and schools come under 504 with some built-in modifications. And then in 1975, the Education of the Handicapped Act morphed into IDEA. And that provides a free, appropriate public education to every student in the least restrictive environment. So you see FAPE and LRE as part of IDEA. Just a brief note on this, because this is something, as I say, that's causing some lawsuits in places and some misunderstandings that get very costly. Okay, ADA requires reasonable accommodations. 504 requires minor adjustments. They're, basically the same language. And the important part to keep in mind here is that 504 applies to the recipient of federal funds, which is the district in any education setting. All right. 504 means that you get federal funds and you're complying with the law. We have been urged by the Department of Education and others that 504 is the responsibility of the agency receiving the funds, and therefore a private school should not write a program that they call 504. Now, there's this mystique out there among parents that there's this magic ticket that's called 504. There is no formal 504 template plan prescription. A 504 plan means you have a student who has a diagnosed disability and you write the kinds of accommodations and modifications to the program. Any accommodations plan that has attached to it a diagnosed disability and a prescription of what are the disabilities that need addressing and how will you handle it, that is tantamount to a 504 plan. So that when a parent wants the 3 magic numbers on the plan, that does nothing more than what a St. Michael's accommodations plan does. Okay. Under 504, there is an exemption for our schools if what is required would cause undue financial burden will cause you to fundamentally alter the program. So that while the law requires that you provide admission or employment, because this applies to employment as well, to an otherwise handicapped person, and they use the word handicapped, so I'm using the language of the law. If the person with minor adjustments, alterations, could teach the class, could pass the course, that is not a reason to disqualify them from employment or from admissions. If you would have to change the program so that that child could succeed. So instead of taking 3 years of math, they take 1 year of simplified math. They're not doing the academic program. So they have to be able to do the program with some adjustments. They may need more time. They may need to sit up front. You know, all of that from how you deal with accommodations. So it's really important that when you accept a student who needs accommodations or adjustments, that you write the plan in conjunction with the parent, that how you're going to do that in the school. If the child would need the program so modified that he or she is not doing what the program purports to be, you do not have to take that child. The big problem that we face is, how do you distinguish between refusal to accept because of a disability or because they are unable to perform with accommodations? And how you address that with the parent is very important, because this is where you can get into disputes. If a teacher is uncomfortable dealing with a student with a disability, that's the teacher's problem. That is not a reason to exclude a student who could otherwise perform the program. Okay, so, you know, I do a whole workshop on an hour and a half on this, but that's generally. So I think it's really important as a superintendent, aspiring superintendent, you really understand the difference between civil rights laws, education laws, and what it is that you have to do to comply. And failure to do so will lose some of the exemptions in addition to a costly lawsuit. IDEA is the education law. So 504 ADA, that's civil rights laws. IDEA is education law. And in this law, even though the law guarantees a free, appropriate public education, that only applies, unfortunately, to students who are in a public school, or to a student who is in a private school because the district decided to place that student. So if the district decides that this child with a severe hearing loss or blind or some other disability for which there's a special school, if the district decides, well, it would be a lot easier on the district, it's cheaper, it's whatever, and places that child in a private institutional school, and by institution, I don't mean residential necessarily, but it could be, then everything is paid for by the district. I mean, it's fundamentally who makes the decision about where the child goes to school, not where the child goes to school. And we've been trying to fight that for years, but we have not been able to deal with that. So that in the law, if a student is parentally placed, and that's the terminology they use, then that child is not entitled to FAPE. They are entitled to an evaluation, child find, if they're suspected of having a disability, but they're not entitled to any services. The way the law is interpreted and written in the regulations and the guidance is that all of the private school students in the district who have a diagnosed disability are put into a pool. And the guarantee is that the money will be spent on some or all of the students in that pool, depending on the consultation process, which is the same as I showed you earlier, pretty much. So that a district has a certain pot of money, and that funding that funding, I'll go back, I'll go to that when I get to the FAQs. That funding services all of the students regardless of what school they're in. So before I go further, I just want to um, look at this 504 and IDEA, 504 accommodations. So under 504, whether you're in a public or a private school, there's no money for this program. It's up to the school to use their local resources to see what could be done to service the student and who has disabilities. So that plan is developed by the classroom teacher, probably the principal, and with parental input. These are the needs of your student. How are you going to address them with what you have? And that's where, unreasonable financial burden. To hire one teacher for one student for our schools would probably be an unreasonable financial burden. 5, the accommodations plan modifies regular education in the regular classroom setting. Now, if you're lucky enough to have resources for a resource room and a resource teacher or two, students may come in and out of the program. But basically, you provide on-site with what you have for students who have special needs, and in-house you monitor and implement the plan, work with the parent. IDEA provides federal funding to support the services. So teachers are hired with the federal money, resources are provided. IEP is the terminology that's used for students who are entitled to FAPE. SP, a services plan, is what terminology they use for those who are parentally placed. That's developed by a team so that if a student is selected to receive services, the public school district that is in charge of the funding meets with the private school official and parents and work on the program. Then the student receives specified services detailed in that plan, and that's provided by personnel who are funded by IDEA money. And generally that is, in our schools, it's additional support staff that come in to serve the student or serve the student elsewhere with the federal money. How are students selected for IDEA? That's consultation with the LEA after they have. So if you have an evaluation, then you work with the district over who's going to get served. If the district receives $10 million from the feds for IDEA and private schools are 5%, private school students are 5% of all the students in the district who have a disability, then 5% of that money is set aside to service our students. The LEA cannot require a private evaluation. The LEA has money. They have to use the administrative budget, and they have to evaluate our students in the same time frame as the public school students. The proportionate share, as I said, is what is on the table for services. Very few states will use state money. Primarily for parentally placed students, it's only federal money. The evaluation is supposed to look at the needs of the student. This is what the student is suspected of having. So if you suspect a student has a learning disability, they can't say to you, no, don't send them. We're only going to evaluate kids with hearing problems or speech problems. The law requires that they evaluate the student for the suspected disability. And then after you get the whole pool of students, the district, in consultation with private school officials, looks at it and says, well, I have X amount of dollars. We could spend that on these 2 kids who need 22 things, or we could spend it on all the kids who need speech and cover 85% of them. That's where you go back and forth in the consultation process. And generally speaking, a lot of times the district, after consultation, does decide to serve like speech or learning disabilities, or work with the school officials to be able to service that disability. The services may be delivered on site at the private school, but that's not mandated, but that's something you should push for. Because if the kids have to be transported elsewhere, some of that money, the money that should serve them with learning, goes into bus transportation, and plus pedagogically, to have the kids out of school traveling when they could be in a classroom is not good business. So you need to argue for that. The COVID relief program, I'm running out of time. The COVID relief programs went through 3 phases. The CARES program had set aside money for elementary and secondary. We expected, since it was a relief program, we would have equitable treatment. The public school groups ganged up and with the chief state school officers, filed lawsuit. And in the end, we basically were treated as we're a Title I program. So schools that thought they were getting X amount of dollars under the directives from the department, when the department was sued, got a lot less. So when we came to the December program in 2020, the CRISA, which we refer to usually as just EANS 1, there was $2.75 billion set aside for non-public schools. We did not participate in ESSER 2, we participate in EANS. That program was a compromise, and they tried, many of the people in the education committees tried to get private schools knocked out completely. So the compromise was the EANS program, where priority was given to low income and COVID impacted, but you could not apply if you had already taken a PPP, the payroll protection program earlier. So this program has pretty much gone through its cycle. There was a lot of money left over in a lot of states because private schools did not apply or did not use all of the money that could have been accessed. So that money's gone back to the GEAR Fund. The governor's over in the first column, the GEAR Fund was to include any private school if any of the funds were used for K-12. So that if the governor decided to use all of his GEAR money on, or her GEAR money on higher ed, then no school, public or private, participated. But if it went for some K-12 schools, then we could apply. What's happening in some of the states with the unused COVID fund, EANS funds, they go back to the GEAR Fund, where all of the restrictions of EANS no longer apply. It's now GEAR money. And so many of the state Catholic Conference and people who lobby for Catholic education at the state level have really been putting pressure on the governors to use that money for private schools, since it was appropriated initially for private schools. Then when we came to the EANS 2, the ARP EANS, the big American Rescue Plan, we got even more hassle trying to get participation in that program. They did come up with the EANS money, and there's also another $2.6 billion added to the IDEA money, so that when you're dealing with IDEA, that money's in play as well. Onto the new EANS 2, private schools had to have a significant level of poverty, and they had to comply with new evidence of COVID impact. And that's very different. In the first EANS program, where the poverty level was really whatever the state agreed to. I mean, there was no limit, there was no expectation. It was, yes, all the high poverty schools got served first, but then all schools got served. Under the second EANS, they added a rider at the end from the Senate Education Committee that you had to have a significant level of poverty, which the Department of Ed put out as 40% unless states requested something different. And we did a lot of work, a lot of advertising with state lobbyists for Catholic schools. And in many states, they were able to get it reduced to somewhere in the low 20s as a poverty count. But a number of states have still maintained the 40%. And then the COVID data is much more data-based, not, in the COVID impact in the first, you could say, well, we lost X amount of dollars in anticipated fundraising or tuition. And so we need additional funds to provide services. None of that applies in this second go round. So you have to show that the poverty, the death rate in your district was X, the COVID infected rate, very specific data that's in the application process. So we're likely going to have a lot of EAMS 2 money left over that will go back to GEAR. So it's important, if you're getting messages, to contact your state education department, et cetera, the governor's office, about EAMS to do so. And I have a couple of minutes more to zip through the rest of this. The 529 education savings plans, that's the college plan to save for tuition. And when you take the money out, to save for tuition and other expenses, when you take the money out, it's tax-free. Under the last administration, that was extended to apply to K-12 tuition if your state allowed it. Not every state allowed it, but this is something that, you know, pursue with your state or your I'm sure your own accountants should know whether or not your state allows this, so that parents could get some savings, put money in and then take it out, basically. Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is undergoing a quick fix, so that you have until the end of October next year to apply for this loan forgiveness program. So basically, if you work for a 501c3, which are all Catholic schools, pretty much all Catholic schools, your teachers could apply if they have a direct student loan, so that if they have other student loans, like a FEL, a Stafford, those can be converted into a direct student loan, where after 120 payments, the loan is forgiven. There's much more information on that particular website, but it's an opportunity. But if you have a private loan, if a student went to the bank, and the student has to have the loan in his or her name, not the parent, but there's some opportunity here maybe for some teachers, and possibly some recruitment of teachers if they know that they can apply for a loan forgiveness. School choice, we had some efforts in the last administration to get some school choice bills with federal funding, and that went nowhere. Unfortunately, school choice from the 80s on became a very partisan issue. And what we saw in the last administration, when we had a Republican president, 2 houses under Republican control, we still couldn't get a choice bill passed because not all Republicans are in favor of any kind of national choice program. A lot of them need the teachers' unions money to get reelected. So the legislators are treading easy on this. So the future continues to lie with the state. And so I'm assuming that you will get a copy of this PowerPoint, or if you want it, you know, email me and I'll send it to you. These are the states that have different kinds of choice programs that are available for participation. The only federal one is the District of Columbia. The rest are all state programs. And NCEA has always supported the right of the parent as the primary educator of the child to pick the school that their child attends, and that equity and justice requires that quality education should not be conditioned on a parent's ability to pay. You know, we have more of our kids, more Catholic kids are in public school than in private school, Catholic schools. And so, I mean, we advocate for a quality education for all, but that the parent should have the right to choose which school that the child will attend, and that if they need assistance, it should be provided from their tax money. So we have, you know, not every choice program is good. We're careful about which programs we support, so that it's important that in any of these programs, the ability to operate as a faith-based institution is not compromised, that we can develop our curriculum, our religious liberty is protected, our right to have accountability measures that are not intrusive or, you know, over restrictive, and that what we're looking at should protect the autonomy and independence of the school and protect the student identity and dignity. I mean, that's really important. Who's a scholarship student, a voucher student, that's nobody's business. But the family and the school administration that handles that. So that, kids should not be labeled in some way as, on a public voucher. So I leave you this for thought. Why leave educational dollars on the table when knowledge of best practices in dealing with local school districts would provide the services to students and teachers that ESSA and other programs include equitable participation for Catholic schools, teachers, and families. So it was a quick blitz. I think I'm almost on time. And so I don't see any questions in the
Does anybody have any questions?
but that's my contact information. As I say, I'm available to provide further information or assistance. So Jill, where do we go from here?
Hi, Sister Dale. Just one second, let me ask if they have any questions for you. Hold on. Anyone? Can you put her contact information back up? Can you put your contact info back up? And I will send you her PowerPoint, so you'll get the whole thing. Okay. You might want to call her today, though, so it's
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. So just on the NCEA website, you can find me.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Sister.
Thank you, Sister Dale.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so it's just in the spirit of best of times and worst of times, Sister. I think the quote that you offered at the Cape Board meeting that really stuck with me is that we've never had so much largesse in certain channels with so little activity with the Federal Education Committee and the Congress on other fronts. So it's just a really unique time for us as Catholic schools.
Didn't get all I didn't get all of that. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'll stand over here, Sister. I was just saying that we've never gotten so much support through some of these bills you described, but then there's also never been so little activity in the Congress on behalf of private schools on other fronts, right? So it's just a very unique time with the courts, the federal programs, but then also an education committee that seems somewhat adversarial with private schools.
Right, and I'll talk about some of that tomorrow when I do the presentation on current policy and some of the issues that we're facing that are basically hostile to us and ways in which we need to be proactive.
All right, so with that, Sister, I want to thank you for your time, and we will see you again tomorrow for your next presentation.
Thank you.
All right, Sister.
Good afternoon.